Hey guys, Poro here with another Worlds 2025 team breakdown, this time for G2 from the LEC. When it comes to the past decade of results, G2 is the Western team with by far the best results. With the exception of MSI 2025, G2 have come in as the greatest hope for the West at every international tournament since MSI 2019, and more often than not, they come away with the best results. With these expectations, G2 as an org always feel pressured to push for better results. In Worlds 2023 and Worlds 2024, they failed to make it to quarterfinals, and despite having a strong core that could easily win domestic titles, the org decided to pull the trigger on some massive changes. The offseason would see the departure of support Mickey and jungler Yike, as they would go on to play for other top teams. If I recall correctly, I believe Mickey forced his way out and Yike was simply let go, but let me know if I got that wrong. For the new players, they signed support Lebrov and went with the young LFL jungler Skewmond, who recently came off of an EU Masters win. The year of 2025 was definitely a project, and the team finished both winter and spring in second place, the first times the org failed to win since 2023 spring. At MSI, it was quite the disaster for G2. They were expected to cruise through play-ins, but were taken to 5 games by the Brazilian representative Furia, and then dispatched 0-3 by BLG. In the main event, G2 would lose 1-3 to Gen G and then 0-3 to FlyQuest, exiting the tournament in embarrassing fashion. At this tournament, many things were made clear. The new players on this team had a lot to improve if G2 wanted to be contenders. Skewmond was a very risk-averse jungler, and this led to him and the team stalling out and not doing anything productive in the early game. Lebrov, who on BDS found success by working with very active jungler Sheo, didn't have anyone to play off of early and therefore found himself lost on the map most times. With nobody on the team stepping up to make plays, Broken Blade and Caps felt pressure to overplay to find any advantage possible, and this led to both players making some uncharacteristically bad mistakes. Clearly something needed to change, and it felt like for the first time in a long time, G2 maybe didn't have a roster who could win LEC anymore. Right as that thought slipped in though, G2 does what they always seem to do, and they figured it out at the last possible moment. A strong split 3 regular season into a dominant playoffs, and G2 are now easily the best team in the region once more. Broken Blade is the team's top laner, and he's one of the most interesting top laners to watch in my opinion. In his career, he has games played on a whopping 76 different champions. In terms of top laners, I couldn't find a single one with more picks. I scoured the stats for players who I think of as the most creative and flexible top laners out there with equally long careers like Keen and Bwipo, but none of them have even made it past the 60s. I think this displays Broken Blade's biggest strength pretty clearly. He's someone who isn't afraid to experiment with interesting picks, and he's always been a meta pioneer. He was the first big player to find success with Rek'Sai top, and that pick would go on to be one of the more important picks at MSI that year. Same thing goes for Zac top, nobody was doing it in tier 1 play before Broken Blade did. Alongside Adam, Broken Blade also shot Darius and Olaf back into the meta at various points as well. Another scary thing about Broken Blade is that he never seems to lose the ability to play these picks either. At any given moment, if the draft seems right, he can lock in any of those champions and carry the game with it. This can come as a double-edged sword as well though. His picks earlier this year included champions like Warwick, Swain, and Dr. Mundo, and while they can sometimes work well, there were also cases where we saw some disasters with these picks too. I don't think people will be forgetting the 0-5 Warwick top against Furia anytime soon. Broken Blade also carries with him a reputation of falling short at different international tournaments. Against the best top laners in the world, he can sometimes come up short. That said, I personally never felt super worried about Broken Blade at these tournaments. Again, I think a lot of Broken Blade's failures come from feeling the pressure to overforce positive plays in games where someone else on the team isn't pulling their own weight, and when push comes to shove, I would probably pick Broken Blade as my top laner if I was building a Western team to defeat the East. Skewmond is the new jungler for G2, and it's been a very up and down rookie year for him. Heading into MSI, I actually thought he would do pretty well. He has good mechanics, a large pool of AP junglers he can play which has been pretty rare this year across the board, and he even spent some time innovating as he was the first tier 1 player to bring Pantheon jungle into the mix, and we all know how Pantheon would go on to perform at MSI and Split 3. There were hints of passive play in the LEC, but not enough to signal any massive red flags toward me before I made my player tier list for MSI. I was clearly wrong, and it was probably my biggest misread for the entire tournament, as Skewmond struggled way more than I thought he would. It turned out there were some massive holes in his game, mostly around which plays he chose to go for. In many early games, he would opt into full clearing and would miss many potential gank angles or dives that could net his team leads. It became enough of a problem that G2 couldn't find wins on some of the key meta champions, and instead were forced to play slow comps with champions like Maokai who could sit back and play the objective game. Heading into Split 3, this was one of the biggest points of emphasis for the team. I would say so far it's gone pretty well actually. Not only is Skewmond still popping off on his favorite picks from before like Pantheon, Zyra, and Dr. Mundo, he's also finding success on the playmaking champions like Poppy, Jarvan, and Xin Zhao. I think in the short period of time that was summer split, Skewmond looks much more well acclimated into the G2 system, and I will once again be putting large expectations on this player. We'll see if I get it wrong a second time or not. Caps is the greatest Western player of all time. If he retired after his more lackluster 2023 year, I might still be defending the cases for Diamond Procs and Perks, but ever since his astoundingly great MSI 2024, he's held that #1 spot for me, and everything else he does in the future is just the cherry on top. Clearly that's not enough for Caps though, because he's been the best player on the team this year, and he has a good argument for being the best performing player in the region as well. At MSI 2025, he was the only player on the team who looked like they were holding their own, and his form has only gotten better now that we're in summer. Much like the other players on the team, his champion pool is massive. In the 11 games Caps played in playoffs, he picked 10 different champions and looked pretty good on all of them, even in the couple of losses G2 had. The meta for Worlds is also looking to be in Caps' favor as well, as LeBlanc and Syndra are both in his top 3 picks of all time, and both are getting significant buffs. What makes Caps so good is that for his entire career he's always been a mid laner who can go toe-to-toe with the best players in the world, whether it be in lane or in mid and late game impact. He rises with the competition, and oftentimes I'll be listing who I thought the best players at an international were, and Caps will be the lone Western player in the list. He just has a special X factor in him that makes you want to believe he can be anyone, and his performances this split have been good enough to back up that feeling. I would not be surprised if Caps ends up once again playing at the level of the other Eastern mid laners. Hansama is a player who admittedly I've always been a little bit skeptical about. In 2020 and 2021, I would have considered myself a Hansama fan. He had been playing for a while at that point of course, but it felt like he was finally coming into his own and rising against better teams with his fearless aggressive play. Then he joined TL in the LCS in 2022, and it was his worst individual year in a long time. While on TL, his play regressed into a very passive and scared style where it felt like he played not to lose instead of playing to win. Despite TL having a stacked super team, they would not qualify for Worlds and Hans would rejoin the LEC. Ever since then, while Hans has had stretches of being the best bot lane in the region, I feel like he's never quite recaptured that confidence he used to have during his rogue years. Whenever G2 go up against top tier Eastern competition, I feel like Hans has the tendency to shy away from the moment and have little to no impact in late game. No matter how big his gold lead would get, I could never feel confident he would close it out cleanly. That said, there were some cases here and there where he would step it up and regain his past aggressive form, like his great series against top esports at MSI 2024, but overall I would say I'm still not 100% sold on him at an international. Domestically though, Hans has looked pretty good. He has a number of great games this split, like his 2 deathless Caitlyn games, his 13 kill Zarya performance, and his overall solid play on the immobile scalers like Jinx and Sivir. When against competition not from the LPL and LCK, Hans plays at about the best level you can expect from an LEC bot laner. If someone said they thought Hans was the best ADC coming out of EU, I wouldn't argue with them. However, I'll need to see Hans step it up once more against an elite bot duo before I'm ready to fully believe in him again. Labrov is probably the player on this roster who was criticized the most over the course of the year. Honestly, it was a pretty tough position Labrov found himself in, replacing the greatest Western support of all time on the greatest Western team of all time. There was a very low likelihood he would be able to live up to the expectations, and he hasn't. On top of that, Labrov's best talents were always in his ability to pair up with his jungler and make plays around the map, and we already talked about how poorly Skewmond handled this facet of the game in Split 1 and 2. As such, Labrov was kind of left to dry out almost. His main strength wasn't being played around, and the expectations were too big for him. Because of these two factors, I've been someone who's been willing to give him another chance, and I've been waiting for him to show off his stuff. And if Split 3 has been any indication, I think he's definitely gotten there. Whether it be on engage or on lane domination, Labrov has been able to do it all this split, and he looked especially good in playoffs. I'll talk more on Labrov in just a minute, because I want to use this to segue into the team overview. G2's turnaround in Split 3 has been tremendous, as they've gone from having no expectations at MSI to high expectations for this upcoming Worlds. I think a big key factor for their improvement has been the chemistry between Skewmond and Labrov. Ever since G2 came back from MSI, it seems like the two of them took the tournament to heart, because both of them have clearly made working together a priority. Skewmond is much more active around the map, and as a result, Labrov is a lot more active too. If you haven't followed LEC this year and can only remember G2's weaknesses internationally, I'm here to tell you that their main limiting factor is basically gone now. With the two playmakers working better together, the pressure is now off of Broken Blade and Caps again, and the two solo laners have been able to play much more like themselves as well. In this split, and this split only, the 5-man unit of G2 actually feel like a coordinated team. Everyone is settled into their role, and they're all working super well to complement each other. In playoffs, they showed a level of proactivity I was hoping to see from them, and their ceiling is significantly higher than I would have thought it to be just a couple of months ago. This leads me into talking about another G2 strength, and this is one you should all be familiar with, because it's a strength this team has always had. No matter how many iterations of rosters G2 goes through, they have always been one of the most creative teams in the world. Sometimes a team or player tries too hard to be creative and forces picks just to force them. I think Merwin's ranged top pool in prior splits was an example of this, where it never felt like Mkoi's drafts matched well with his counter picks. Sometimes a player like the Shy falls into this trap as well, where his team has something good going and he decides the matchup is good for Nidalee, and now there's a random Nidalee top in the game. I could list a bunch of other examples, but the point is this. G2's creativity is special because unlike some of these other cases, it always feels like G2's oddball picks are very specifically honed and practiced. Think of it like this. Every team has a meta read, champions they think are strong and weak. Teams figure out this meta read through three main different means. First is what players think are strong, second is what's working for the team in scrims, and third is what the other teams around the world are finding success with. Most teams do it in the same order. See what top teams are finding success with, try it for themselves in scrims, keep the stuff that's working in scrims, and then splash personal preferences on top of it to finalize their strategy. G2 feels like they do it differently. From what I can tell, they basically don't care about that first step at all. Other teams can do their own thing. G2's players and coaches are confident they have the best meta read, and they'll prioritize that read even if nobody else is doing it. They also come up with their meta read differently to begin with. Since there's less of a reference point to work with, they start with the player's ideas of what's strong, and then move into scrims afterwards to test it. Obviously, a lot of what I'm saying is conjecture. I'm sure G2's players and coaches spend numerous hours analyzing other teams' games and picks and determining what's strong and weak in drafts based off of those teams. But I'm more so trying to get across the point that the players on G2 clearly have some kind of backwards process to drafting, because their meta reads, while being unique, are always very consistent. I'll give you some examples. G2 have decided that Kled is good in the current meta. It's not a random pocket pick, it's not a niche counter pick. The team literally just has a read that Kled has a lot of spots where you can pick him in the current meta, and they like to play Kled comps as a result. The main way in which they do this, based on what I can tell, is that they like Kled into some key matchups like Sion and Rumble, and then once they have the Kled, they'll always pair it with an engaged support who can pair well with the Kled ult, and an aggressive skirmishing jungler. G2 have clearly thought this out and practiced it, and they've used it in every playoff series as either their Game 1 or Game 2 comp. G2 also has a read that prio bot laners are still in fashion. Many teams across the world have kind of waned off on this idea. Kalista, Varus, and Ezreal were all hit with nerfs, and are showing up less as a result. With those bot laners gone, teams have lower prio on the lane stomper supports. With this lower prio and range supports comes some weaker laning marksmen. Yunara, Kai'Sa, and Xayah are back. Scalers like Zeri and Jinx are seeing more play as well. Alongside of these picks are engaged supports like Alistar and Rakan, who have flawed lane phases if challenged, but nobody is challenging. Instead, the response has just been matching scalers with more engagers like Rel or Leona. G2 seem to have decided the rest of the world moved on a bit too quickly, and they still employ a lot of the same aggressive 2v2 picks more often than other teams do. They have a higher prio on picks like Karma and Nico. They're willing to throw in a Bard here or a Renata there. They play Ezreal and Caitlyn and try to bully their way to an objective lead. Another unique read G2 have is that they clearly think Volibear is a viable jungler right now. Skewmond picked it in all three playoff series, while literally nobody else at Worlds even cares about Volibear. If you go back and look at G2's best years, it's the same thing. Unique but consistent meta reads that they use to try and stay one step ahead of everyone else. When I see G2 doing it in Split 3 this year, it tells me that the team is full of confidence, and that's exactly what they were missing for the two splits they didn't win. I'll probably end up being disappointed, but I can't help but be incredibly excited to watch G2 at Worlds. All year long, I've been saying FlyQuest is the best Western team. Fly is our best chance at making it out of Swiss. Fly are the team who people should put their faith in. Well, I'll tell you what. The best League of Legends I've watched from the West this year came not from FlyQuest, but from G2 in their finals match against Mkoi. The G2 I watched 3-0 their way to another title, was a team who can absolutely win against the East, and if they show up like that in Swiss, I think this is the year they can break their Swiss curse and make it out. That's all I have for you for this one. 14 down, 3 to go. I recently started a Patreon for people who want to support me more while I'm making these videos. I have 3 tiers, each with varying amounts of benefits including different types of behind the scenes content, and even a custom Poro drawing that I'll display in video outros. If that interests you, check out the Patreon link in the description. I'll see you all for the next one. Bye!